Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Driving Loyalty and Exponential Volume for Your Organization. I am Mackenzie Bean with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. In about a week following the webinar, we will be sending all registrants a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. Please be patient as the post-webinar preparation of materials can take some time. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenter. Sarah Giannetti is Director of Revenue Cycle at KIMBALL Healthcare. With more than 25 years of healthcare business operations experience, Sarah oversees patient access services as well as financial clearance, scheduling, billing, collections, payer contract negotiations, and customer service for all hospital-based services. She continuously uses process improvement to drive down denials, increase collections, and enhance the overall patient experience. Eliciting holistic improvements from the inside out through collaboration is a key value that Sarah subscribes to. At this time, I am pleased to turn the floor over to Sarah to begin today's presentation.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mackenzie. And officially, good afternoon to my East Coast colleagues, and good morning to those of you still in Central or Pacific time, enjoying perhaps your first or maybe second cup of coffee. I'm pleased to have this time with you today, and I want to preface our topic and discussion today by saying that I am suffering a little bit from a winter cold, so please excuse any nasalness that you hear through the phone. I will persevere nonetheless and am energized and excited to bring you today's presentation. So today we're going to be talking about how to drive loyalty and improve volume in your organization by having a good self-pay strategy, particularly around those larger patient balances that are becoming a larger and larger segment of our population. So what is the self-pay problem? I think we're all acutely aware of this, but it certainly bears repeating that, of course, we know self-pay is a larger and larger segment of what we're having to deal with in healthcare receivables. And some statistics that I can share with you, obviously, 1/2 of Americans that have insurance through their employer have at least a minimum deductible of $1,000. And corresponding with that, we know that 70% of Americans have less than $1,000 of savings at any given time. And I think we all saw this firsthand as a nation during the recent government shutdown, where we saw our fellow Americans really struggling to pay their bills, even just in terms of their day-to-day requirements and cost of living, with missing one paycheck or two paychecks. So we know that this is a real problem that is a factor for everyone. And over 1/2 of Americans say that receiving a large medical bill can be very traumatic, and almost as traumatic as receiving a very severe diagnosis in and of itself. So it really creates that added layer of stress on top of an additional stressful situation. And so as a result of the cost that patients are bearing today, it has become a real driver in consumerism among patients, where they're really becoming more active participants in their care now that that first dollar is often coming out of their own pocket. And as a result of their engagement, and they're really starting to become engaged consumers, 1/3 of them are deciding to delay their medical treatments because of those costs. And I can share anecdotally that I have witnessed this firsthand in our own organization as we field calls from patients around getting pre-treatment estimates. And when we share that information with patients, we do hear on certain occasions that patients decide not to go through with services because the cost is such a factor for them. So what is the state of this patient financial crisis that we're dealing with, and what do we need to think about? Obviously, we all know that there are rising operational costs associated with trying to collect these patient balances. and organizations find themselves in need of finding strategies, tools, and resources to pursue payment from patients. And that's coupled with just the general confusion about medical bills. There are multiple providers often involved in patient care, particularly at a hospital level or a system level. And then that becomes very difficult for patients to comb through and understand what it is that these medical bills and their out-of-pocket costs are telling them. And of course, as a result, because there's so much confusion, again, patients are really fearful of these bills and really not knowing how to pay for them, not knowing what to expect, and trying to navigate through that whole personal financial obligation component. And then additionally, we have pressure at the state level. There are a lot of states that are now looking into protecting consumers to make sure that they are not being caught by surprise by these bills and that organizations are being as transparent as possible. We know here in Connecticut, we have surprise billing legislation that was enacted several years ago for this very purpose. And even now, there's movement at the federal level with Senator Maggie Hassan from New Hampshire bringing legislation forward to Washington in a bipartisan way, really trying to make sure that consumers are getting the most information possible up front prior to having services. And then, of course, with all these pieces, the medical billing market is growing, and the companies that are trying to get into this space are growing because it is such a rapidly evolving and shifting marketplace around patient liability. And so why has this become a larger pain point or pressure for organizations? As many of us know, the problem is no longer the uninsured. The uninsured was the situation that we dealt with 10 years ago. Today, we're really focused on the balances after insurance, or what we call the uninsured, people that have health insurance, but really are struggling due to those out-of-pocket costs to meet those financial obligations. And you can see here from this study that was shared from McKinsey & Company, we saw about a 133% increase in hospital bad debt as a balance after insurance in just that 8-year period. And we here at KIMBALL have seen similar trends. Our numbers have trended along those similar lines in that time period as well. So as a result, obviously, providers and healthcare systems are struggling to try to solve this problem. As we know, hospital and healthcare margins are under constant pressure. Organizations really want to be putting any extra money that they're seeing to the bottom line going back towards new technology, aging infrastructure, and of course labor, which is such an expensive component of any organization. And then trying to figure out on top of that, how are you going to put more resources and investment into collecting balances from patients. It's a real challenge. And of course, some of the numbers have also shown that 68% of patients that have a bill even up to $500 are not paying those balances in full. So that tells us that even with what might seem like a non-catastrophic bill, it's a struggle. It's a struggle for patients to meet those obligations. And tied with that, because patients are now more acutely aware of what's going on with their spend, they are moving towards these lower cost alternative care settings so that they can try to make sure that they're maximizing their dollar. And I think we know that the problem obviously is not going anywhere. We see this trend that has been going on and is projected to continue to climb even further up through 2020 at 45% of Americans having a high deductible health plan. And without any foreseeable changes in the structure of our health insurance system, I would presume that this is going to continue well beyond 2020 without some dramatic change. So what are some of the strategies that organizations are looking at to solve this problem? Obviously, prepayment for elective services is something that a lot of organizations are putting time and energy into. They're becoming more proactive by attempting to collect in advance, or at least having those conversations up front with patients for those elective non-emergent services. Also of importance is looking at our charity care policies as organizations and really changing the factors around qualification for the underinsured. It's no longer the traditional segment of the population that we're serving that were uninsured, but rather those that have insurance but still have that financial distress going on in the background. And then, of course, looking to find ways that they can meet these larger obligations over time, so patient financing and helping patients manage those expenses, which is really what we're going to be doing a deeper dive into today. Also, things like propensity to pay scoring, and this goes along with the charity piece, but really using that business intelligence to figure out who are your patients that really are not going to be able to pay. We really know based on their past history, their credit patterns, that their income scoring, that they really don't have any advantages in terms of paying these bills. So how to segment further so that we can really put our efforts in a targeted, focused way among our patient population. And then continuing to look at tools that we can use, whether it be loyalty programs or outside business partners that can give us the tools and resources that we may not have internally to try to collect from this population. So I'll share with you a little bit about KIMBALL Healthcare and who we are. We are a small independent hospital in the northeastern quarter of Connecticut. We have about 104 acute inpatient beds here. We are affiliated as a community partner with Yale New Haven, although it is not a full affiliation. It is mostly on the clinical and supply chain side where we have that community partnership with Yale. A payer mix that is probably similar and resonates with many of you. We're heavily focused on the governmental payers, and then the rest of the complement being made up by commercial insurance and the uninsured. And as you can see by these numbers, for us in particular, it's not necessarily that uninsured population, but really what we're focusing on today is that underinsured population, which rolls into that commercial and private insurance bucket. So what was the catalyst for change here at KIMBALL? We were continuously trying to find ways to better manage our in-house payment process, but we were finding that it was becoming more complex without the right infrastructure in place, and the demand for longer payment terms and plans from patients was going up. And so we were struggling to really keep track of where we were in the payment plan process and keeping tight controls around those payment plan options, not having the infrastructure to do so. We also knew that we wanted to do something where we were going to be able to retain market share. Obviously, that's a big factor today, particularly as the cost component comes in. So not only did we want to be able to offer them a way to pay, but in a way that they felt was giving them a little bit of control and having some dynamic choices. And then obviously, another component, which I didn't mention on this slide, but keeping bad debt in check. Obviously, we wanted to make sure that with this increase in the underinsured population, we were going to be able to keep bad debt in check and not have a precipitous rise along with bad debt as these high deductible health plans grew in addition. So some of the preconceived patient financing thoughts that were swirling around here when we started investigating. Obviously, there was initial hesitation thinking that layering in a new system or program would add more problems because we're making it more complex. We're having to work out of a different system in order to make this program work. Obviously, the staff would be unhappy because whenever you implement a new process or a new third party, it always seems like that's going to make things more complicated. And then an additional concern about how patients would qualify. And we really wanted to make sure that there was not going to be any sort of letdown for patients who wanted to get into a long-term patient payment program, but then couldn't based on their past credit history. We wanted it to be easy for patients. Again, making it as light of a lift as possible, not only on our side as the provider, but also for the patient, really making it easy so that people would want to be a part of it. And ultimately, obviously making it easy so that they would follow through. So again, some of those operational needs that had to be a must for us, we had to find a partner that the staff could buy into, understanding that it was good for both the hospital and our patients through a partnership. We wanted it to be simple and easy to enroll in. We also wanted to make sure that it was something that was not going to be an extra cost to our patients out of the gate. We really wanted to make this as painless as possible so that we could help our patients know that they can trust us, and it was really about providing the care to them first and foremost, and then we would find them a way to make payments. So the solution that we ended up landing upon was an interest-free payment option, allowing patients a longer duration of time to pay than they had been accustomed to in the past. We also wanted a solution where we could come up with a co-branded loyalty card, and this would allow patients to use this for future services, almost as if it were a credit card, but linked to KIMBALL so that they could understand that this was a partnership and also our way of allowing them to have more time. And then lastly, having a marketing program so that we could share the news about this program and really get the word out, making sure that it would never be a reason for a patient not to come and have care, knowing that they might not be able to pay for it all at once. And so we ultimately landed on a partnership with CAREPAYMENT and their program. And some of the great things that really drew us into the CAREPAYMENT program, first out of the gate, was that there was no application process and everyone qualified. So there was no filtering or sorting out to say yes to this patient, no to that patient. It was across the board and non-discriminatory in that regard so that everyone could benefit. There was no interest, as I mentioned. We wanted to not apply interest to the patients, to let them know that it really was about making sure that they had care first and foremost. And then making it as flexible as possible. So giving them dynamic term lengths, anywhere from 6 to 72 months, depending on their balance. Again, trying to find whatever would best fit their lifestyle. We also wanted it to be a high-touch experience, and that's what we found in the partnership with CAREPAYMENT, where the program was very easy to understand. There was no cumbersome application process for patients. The onboarding was easy. There was a robust customer service center for them to call into if they had questions. And a very important point was allowing them to roll up accounts at the guarantor level. So if they had repeat services over time, they were able to fold those services in and those balances in without concern. And then, of course, giving them multiple payment options, as is demanded in any climate today, through mail or through the phone, online, and through the portal. And lastly, creating a co-branded strategy around letting our patient population know that this was truly a partnership. It wasn't just a third party that we were pushing their balances out to, but that we still had a stake in it. And we were investing in this company because of that partnership that we could establish and have long term. And so the CAREPAYMENT program really sets up for a couple of different avenues in which you can enter. So the first option is the patient choice. And this is where the patient can choose to enroll in the program at any time essentially after that claim pays, and once there is a balance obligation on the patient's behalf. We simply make a quick handoff to the CAREPAYMENT team, and the patient determines what length of time is going to best suit their needs, and it is literally done within 10 minutes. The second choice would be a patient assign, and this is where all balances at a certain age would roll over to the program. So as opposed to the patient choice where we're dealing with patients one at a time who are choosing to opt into the program, this would be an automatic rollover at day 60 as an example, once all of those adjudication efforts with insurance has occurred. And then lastly, there's a portion of the program where they can convert existing payment plans that have been managed in-house, and they can carry out the duration of those payment plans on our behalf. And so there's always the question of interest-bearing versus interest-free. Our decision when we went live was to go with an interest-free program. We really, again, wanted to let our patients know that our choice was to first and foremost make sure that they had the care that they need, and then we would help them sort through the financial piece as a secondary component, because we felt that this would also help foster the loyalty over the long term and understanding that this was truly a partnership. The implementation, not unlike a lot of implementations in healthcare, approximately 12 weeks in timeline, mostly on the IT side, with a little bit of setup on the receivable side in terms of establishing a financial class. But again, not a very complicated lift to get it up and running, and a little onboarding in terms of the patient portal for our customer service team, and off we went. So what were the lessons learned for us? In the beginning, when we first went live, we had gone with the full opt-in program where all patients were rolled over at a certain increment of time, around 60 days. And what we found, while there were advantages to doing it this way, we found over time that we wanted to have a little bit more control so that we could really monitor the follow-through and that patient engagement piece from those folks that had opted in. So we made the transition after the first few years of the program into the opt-in patient choice program so that we could measure enrollment and adoption more closely. And of course, with any new process, just ensuring that the staff understood the program and how it worked compared to the existing payment plan strategy, and making sure that we were explaining it to patients. I will say that initially we had a lot of resistance from patients because they were accustomed to paying their balances directly to the hospital. And then anyone that is from a community hospital, I'm sure you can appreciate how closely tied patients become to delivering that check or that payment directly to the facility. But with some education and coaching from our team members here, we were able to assure that our patients that this was a partnership and that we were not going to just be sending them off and not knowing what was happening with their account. And then just some feedback from our staff. Obviously, being able to offer patients a long-term payment plan has been a huge satisfier for staff, because they are often fielding calls from patients who are distraught or really have anxiety about how they're going to meet their financial obligations. And what we find is that they are immediately relieved to learn about this long-term financing program that we have available through our partnership with CAREPAYMENT. And by patients being able to alleviate stress for our patients, it in turn also makes their job less stressful. So it ends up being a win-win for everyone. So what have our results been with this program? We've had the partnership with CAREPAYMENT since 2010. So it's been a long-standing program in our organization. So over the course of that time, we've seen about a $3.5 million increase in cash with these accounts rolling over to CAREPAYMENT, and a little over 9,000 of individual patients that have enrolled in this program, which is a little over 1,100 every year. And over the last 4-year span, particularly when we went to that patient choice program, we've seen our net placements double. We've also seen our net cash double. And the patients that are requesting the program as new-time or first-time patients has grown by nearly 36%. And with respect to loyalty, we see now that we have a lot of repeat users. About 64.6% of our patients are coming back to us, asking us if they can continue to put new balances into the program, or if they're having an upcoming service, they will also reach out to us and ask if their upcoming service can be folded into the program, which of course is an automatic yes. And despite those repeat users, we also see that there are quite a few patients, over 40%, that are at that aged place where they may be hearing about the program for the first time and are showing interest and are engaging in the program. So we find that through all the components and all the life cycle of these accounts, we're still seeing interest along the way. And that last one is key because, as we know, over time, the longer and the further away you get from that point of care, the likelihood of collecting money goes down every single day. So being able to engage people even that far out from a service is critical, and it's an effective strategy. And one other result component that I'd like to share with you, because I know this is one of the questions that I often get when I talk about the program, is what happened with our bad debt write-offs over time? Did we see any impact to that? And I can share with you that since 2010, when we started this program, we've actually seen our bad debt write-offs go down by 7%. So while our collection percentages are going up, our bad debt has gone down, which makes me believe that we have really hit that sweet spot in terms of providing an affordable avenue for patients that really meets their needs. So that's it in a nutshell in terms of the Day-Kimball patient financing journey. I would love to answer any questions that are out there from the audience.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that excellent presentation. We'll now begin today's question and answer session. So please submit any questions you have for Sarah by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We'll try to get through as many questions as we have time for. And it looks like the first question is from an audience member who wants to know, how did CAREPAYMENT get paid? Was it a % of your collections or a flat rate?
So the answer is it depends. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but it depends on some background soft hit credit scoring that goes on behind the scenes, and it's determined whether or not those accounts will be funded initially right out of the gate, or if they will go on to sort of a billing service. So essentially, if it goes onto a billing service, it's just a flat fee structure, and if it goes into a funded account strategy, it's a percentage.
Great, thank you so much for explaining that, Sarah. Another audience member wants to know if Day-Kimball is a not-for-profit health system.
Yes, we are. So we are a not-for-profit health system, even though we are trying to make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's with respect to charity care and all of those pieces that the IRS is increasingly looking at, even for not-for-profit hospitals.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Sarah. The next question is, as part of this service, do patients get to see what their care will cost before they get the care or after?
So in our organization in particular, we do have a pre-service estimation process in place that we have been running for about 6 months. It is not for 100% of scheduled services, but I would say it covers about 30 to 40% of those larger out-of-pocket services. So we do try to have some dialogue with all patients prior to the service, and we continue to refine that strategy. But we really believe in having those conversations with patients ahead of time so that they can not only understand what the expectation is, but know what solutions and tools are available to them so that they can not feel that stress and anxiety going into any type of care.
Great, I think that's super helpful for our audience to know. Another audience member wants to know, what did this program do for your AR days or the time from billing to collection?
So it's interesting. I would say it has remained flat or slightly decreased. So the way that it works mechanically on the AR is that once the accounts are moved over to CAREPAYMENT, they are netted down to 0 and they come off of our AR. Any accounts that do not end up ultimately being fulfilled or paid out through the duration of the payment plan at a certain point in time, they will be returned to the hospital. They move back onto our AR only briefly, and then if they are not final collected on, they move over to bad debt. So there's a little bit of movement there that's kind of unique, but despite all that, we have not seen our AR days go up. We've seen our AR days actually come down over the years. I want to say that we're at about 36 days right now, and 10 years ago, we were hovering around 42, 43 days in AR.
Great, thank you so much for clarifying that. The next question is, how was customer satisfaction measured other than by receivables collected?
So I think our staff has a lot of conversations, a lot of good conversations with patients on the phone, and also our pre-service estimate team. And we really gauge the pulse of the patient in terms of those conversations and what feedback is that we're getting it. So we have a regular feedback loop that comes into our daily huddles from our customer service team, and they share with us whenever we receive positive feedback from patients, and conversely negative feedback. But we find that this is really it's really a win-win for us, because it's a program that is easy for patients to use and takes a lot of that guesswork and stress away from everyone.
Absolutely, thanks for pointing that out. Another audience member asked, what reconciliation is required monthly?
So we actually have a weekly reconciliation process. That weekly reconciliation process takes maybe 5 to 10 minutes at most. I will say that the team at CAREPAYMENT is excellent about working through that weekly reconciliation. It's a very simplified process. They make it easy. So again, it goes back to that not being a real heavy lift when you implement this program and try to get it off the ground. We've been very, very pleased about that aspect of the program in particular, because sometimes those reconciliations can be painful.
Great. And the next question is about what services this program was used for. And the audience member says, was the service utilized for high-value imaging, such as MRI or CT, as well as procedures and surgeries?
So that is a great question. And I was looking at our internal numbers the other day. And interestingly enough, the highest percentage that we see this program being used for, when I trended it over the last 3 years, was actually for services such as the high-end imaging of CT, MRI, even diagnostic mammography, which is a pain point for many organizations, and interestingly, lab work. So we, at our hospital, we still have our own in-house laboratory that does all of our outpatient lab testing. And because of that deductible impact, particularly on many patients, lab has become this area where patients who had never before even had to think about a lab test are now being left with balances for lab work that can be hundreds of dollars. So we've seen where 20% is roughly lab, 20% is roughly those high-end imaging procedures, another 19% is emergency room, and then the next largest percentage, around 15%, would be those ambulatory surgical cases, one-day surgeries, same-day admissions for surgeries, those types of services. Great question.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. Thanks again, Sarah. The next question is, what happens when a patient defaults with CAREPAYMENT? Does the account get returned to KIMBALL?
Yes, so the account, if they do default, the account gets returned to us, and then it gets moved over sort of in a simultaneous fashion over to bad debt. So at that point, they are moved over, but it does come back to us.
Wonderful. And another audience member is asking about whether there's recourse. They say, what percent overall have recourse, and do you add the recourse back to active AR or off to DB?
Yep, so off to bad debt, which would be similar to the question we just talked about. Our recourse rate is very low. It's less than 10%. And I think that is because of the fact that we really have a controlled environment, and we do a lot of patient engagement about the program. So they have a lot of trust in the program and a lot of repeat users. So that recourse rate is very low for us.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. Another audience member wants to know about the pre-service price estimation for patients topic. and they ask, do you find that patients are more likely or less likely to get the care if they know that it will cost, if they know what it will cost ahead of time?
That's another great question, and that's a whole nother topic on the human dynamics around knowing what they'll have to pay up front. You know, it's funny because some patients are grateful because it allows them to plan, and then other patients will make the decision to not have the care because of how much the out-of-pocket is going to be. So it's hard. It's, you know, it's a balancing act because you certainly don't want to have those conversations post-service, which we've had here in our organization, and I'm sure others can attest that they've had these as well, where patients will receive a bill in the mail, and one of the comments they will make to our customer service reps is that if they had known how much the service was going to cost them, they would not have chosen to have the service. So it's, you know, you definitely have different camps of patients, you know, that are understanding what their deductible is, and once they hear that number, they're okay with it because they can plan for it, and others that are always going to be taken by surprise no matter what, and then them having to make that decision really becomes a personal choice for them.
Absolutely, that's a great insight. We have another audience member who wants to know how many days prior to the scheduled care was the first contact made with the patient regarding their financial responsibility?
Okay, so on the pre-estimate piece, so we try to work, right now our team is not as large as I would like it to be, so right now we're only able to call people 3 days out or greater, just because we want to make sure right now that if we leave a message with someone, they have enough time to call us back and have a conversation. So we are not having those conversations with anybody that's sort of a one-day add-on, which is something that we're working towards. So I would say usually 3 days out and greater for scheduled services are where we're trying to have those conversations with patients.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. Looks like we have a couple more questions rolling in. The next one is, do you use the care payment program for both your hospital services and your professional-based services?
So right now, because of the way our organization is set up, and even though we have what's called the Dave Kimball Medical Group, all of their receivables run through a separate platform, a separate billing platform. We are not integrated in that regard today. So because of that, we're unable to sort of marry our physician bills and our hospital bills together, although that's more of a limitation on Dave Kimball's side than it is on CAREPAYMENT side. If we had all the billing in one system, we would be able to have that sort of combined account program at the guarantor level, if that was our structure.
Got it. That makes sense. Thanks, Sarah. Another audience member is asking, is your funding percentage based on your organization's historical financial standing, and has your funding percentage changed over the years?
So the funding percentage really has to do with the patient's soft credit score in terms of where they are with their own personal credit. And the nice thing is with CarePayment, we have the ability to control what that threshold is in terms of patients qualifying for funding out of the gate versus qualifying for what we call the billing service, where it's not being funded out of the gate because it might be considered this might be considered a little bit of a credit risk. So even though it's seamless to the patient and transparent to the patient, we're trying to mitigate the risk on our side as an organization by having those be billing service patients until we see that they're really going to engage based on their credit score. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say CarePayment. They've been great about allowing us to kind of look at those, be transparent with the data to see where at different credit scoring levels are patient engaging and where are they recoursing most, and really playing with those numbers. So they've been great about that.
Fantastic. And another question on the topic of credit scores. An audience member asked, since CarePayment is running credit scores in the background, are patients made aware that their scores are being reviewed?
So they are not being made aware because it's a soft hit to their credit, so it doesn't impact their credit at all. And it's really, again, just being made so that we can determine whether or not they're going to be, those accounts should be directly funded, because we think there's a high propensity for follow through on behalf of the patient versus not. So it's almost a way of having an application process without having an application process. But again, because it's a soft hit to their credit, there's nothing that's going to adversely impact them as a consumer whatsoever.
Awesome. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Another question is, what did the process of choosing a patient financing vendor actually look like?
So I think early on, we really wanted to find someone in terms of a partner that was exclusively focused on healthcare. Of course, there's a lot of organizations, and this is not a good or a bad thing, but just there's a lot of banking institutions and a lot of different companies that have gotten into this space, and we really wanted it to be an organization that was exclusively focused on healthcare. And so that's really why we were drawn to this particular partnership for us, because we felt like that was a really good match for us. And then obviously making it easy in terms of an application process, because again, you'll find the entire spectrum of different types of programs you can enroll into and what those application processes look like for patients. And we really wanted to make sure that it was as easy as possible for patients and it was exclusively focused on healthcare.
Wonderful. Thank you for elaborating on that. We have another question from an audience member who asks, is the billing service handled by your staff or by CAREPAYMENT staff?
It is handled by CAREPAYMENT staff. So even though they're making that sort of distinction and filtering out patients in one of two categories of funding versus billing service, it's all handled by CAREPAYMENT. And the patients are still receiving statements based on the payment plan length and duration that they've enrolled into, and it's seamless to them. So it's really just an internal thing that happens on the CAREPAYMENT side. But it's all managed by CAREPAYMENT.
Great. This next question goes back to the topic of patient defaults, and it says, what is the patient default rate from using this funding source?
So I think that might be the same question we had earlier, or very similar, but our recourse rate or the default rate has been 9.5%. So it's under 10%, which again is very low. Even by comparisons of our own internal, when we were managing payment plans internally, we were seeing actually higher recourse rates because we weren't managing it well. So having a partner that can not only offer those long-term solutions, but really manage it more tightly to pay attention to those patients that are maybe not engaging or missing payments, I think that's a real win.
Absolutely. And it looks like we have time for about one more question. And this audience member wants to know, can you describe what ongoing support has been like?
Sure. So I will say that one of the things I really appreciate about CAREPAYMENT is that they are a very engaged partner. We have monthly meetings where we go over our numbers, as well as quarterly discussions that do a little bit of a deeper dive. They're very attuned to identifying patterns within your program and trying to isolate what it is that might be happening, what might be shifting, to really help us constantly look at the program and make sure that we've got the right structure in place. And I think that's a huge value added for me, because you don't necessarily find that in all vendor relationships, even outside of patient financing. And I think that's really an area where the CAREPAYMENT team excels in terms of staying engaged and really understanding that this is a partnership and having that cohesive dialogue with us on a routine basis.
Great. And before we conclude today's presentation, Sarah, let me turn to you one more time. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I think, the final thoughts are just, obviously this is, I'm sure this is a pain point for everybody that's listening today. And as much as we know all of our CFOs want those dollars yesterday and they want us to collect those balances, I think that this is it's a great solution for patients. And it really does lend itself to that longer term partnership with your patients, where they don't have to come into services, even those unexpected services, not knowing how they're going to handle it. Because once they've established this relationship with CAREPAYMENT, they know it's going to be there for them for future services. So I think that's not only an advantage, but it again takes away that stress, which is the last thing that patients need when they're going through any type of medical service. So I think it's an area that we all need to focus on, and you know, finding one that's an easy lift, of course, is always important. So and happy to have folks reach out to me as well, you know, if they have any questions outside of today's webinar.
Great. Well, that is all the time that we have left for today. I want to thank Sarah Giannetti for sharing with us and CAREPAYMENT for sponsoring today's webinar. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.